Hey everybody, I hope that you're doing well and had an enjoyable Memorial Day weekend. Sad to announce this is the second to last lesson I'll be posting, and then that will do it for the semester. So do make sure that you are caught up on your assignments. I'm going to try to keep this one a little bit shorter, but let's dive in. Today we're going to be covering just kind of a few elements of kind of the government's role in the economy, which we did pretty thoroughly with the last lesson. First thing will be how the Democratic Party and the Republican Party have kind of different attitudes in terms of the government's role and the ideal government role in the economy. Quickly going over just a few of the different types of taxes. And then this is a typo. It should say the role of the Federal Reserve, what the Federal Reserve is and what it does. And you do have an assignment that deals with that. So, so, last week's lesson really dealt with kind of in depth what the government can do when it comes to regulating or being involved in the economy. So I'm not going to linger here too much, but the government can and does play a pretty big role in this country when it comes to economic activity, uh, through tax policy, through services that it offers. I mean, even think of the post office. The post office is providing an economic good and service. So there really are many things that the government does, but there's also different attitudes as to what the government should do and if what the government is doing is actually an advantageous for the economy in general. So we're going to look at right now are just really the two general points of views, and there's more than two, but the big general points of views when it comes to the Republican and the Democratic Party in terms of what the government should be doing with the economy. Now, it's important to keep in mind whenever you're doing any sort of exercise like this that these are big picture ideas, these are big picture attitudes, and there is much more subtlety and variation between individual politicians or individual views. So never think that all Democrats believe this or all Republicans believe this type of thing. There are different types of Republicans. There are different types of Democrats. You will find some Republicans that actually favor government involvement in the economy. So this is much bigger picture. So don't take this as an exhaustive description or an exhaustive detail. But generally, Republicans favor a more limited view of what the government should be doing when it comes to the economy. A lot of Republicans want to have as little government involvement as possible when it comes to regulating or being involved with economic activity. Most Republicans have a positive view of what we're going to call the free market, which is effectively just economics running without any sort of government interference or government overactivity. So, the think of this way: when Coca-Cola, Pepsi, shoe companies, grocery stores, they are selling goods and services without much government regulation, without much government activity, without much government interference. So really, just people buying and selling goods and services, for whatever they want. A very, very, very limited role of the government. So they tend to favor fewer regulations, they will ask themselves, can the free market, can individual companies or businesses provide a good or service without the government? And if they can, then the government shouldn't be doing it. So they generally don't want to have much government involvement in the economy. They want to have as little government as possible. One ramification of this idea is the less that government does, the lower taxes will be. So Republicans, a major Republican talking point tends to be that they want lower taxes. Um, Ronald Reagan famously said that a couple of things actually. He famously said that the government knows, or you know how to spend your money better than the government does. Republicans also tend to argue that when the government does do something, it tends to do it ineffectively. And usually, whatever service the government is providing, they would argue, can be provided for better by a private company, by a private individual or corporation. So the government tends to do a bad job of providing a lot of services. And one argument I remember Mitt Romney making when he was running for president in 2012 was that if the government does a bad job, you can't fire them. You can't, choose another alternative. Whereas if you're hiring out something and you don't like a service that's being provided, you can go elsewhere. You don't have to be locked in to that type of thing. So Republicans tend to be have a pretty positive view of the free market. They do acknowledge that the free market, it's not always kind. You are going to sometimes have people get left behind, but that's kind of the nature of economics in general. So most Democrats are capitalist. You have some kind of extreme people, kind of the Bernie Sanders wing of the party, who have a very, very negative view of capitalism. But most Democrats are capitalists, but they would argue that the free market does need to be guided, controlled, and regulated. That the free market left completely to its own devices without government regulation becomes cruel, becomes dominated by corporations, a lot of them would argue, and really needs to have some sort of government involvement just to keep things on the up and up. So things like a higher minimum wage or government regulation of the medical insurance field. Those are things that Democrats tend to support. So one area you can look at is the Affordable Care Act, or more commonly referred to as Obamacare. That was very, very much opposed by Republicans when it came out, very much supported by Democrats when it came out. That called for more government regulation of the health insurance markets, and actually even providing for government health insurance policies. So that's just one example of, you can see, any sort of regulations. And again, to the point that you can be a Republican and favor some government regulation. For example, child labor laws. That is more government, but pretty much I can't think of any mainstream Republican who would argue that child labor laws are bad. So Democrats, again, tend to favor more government involvement. Republicans tend to favor less. So in terms of taxes, I was instructed to go over a little bit of taxes. It's important to keep in mind anything the government pays for or anything the government provides does need to be paid for. So in terms of jobs, people who work for the post office, people who work for the military, that those salaries have to come. Tanks for the military, cars for the post office, schools, the White House itself. Anything the government does have to be paid for. And the way that the government collects most of its revenue is through taxes. So that's money that is charged to the people. And here, this is not an exhaustive list, but here are just some examples of government taxes. Income tax, that's money that's taken out of your paycheck to pay for government services. Corporate taxes are taxes on profits by corporations. Sales taxes are usually a state thing, but you'll notice that when you go buy something, if you buy something for $100, you're oftentimes going to spend $104 or $105 or whatever. That is a sales tax, and there's usually a sales tax on most items. Property taxes, I actually just paid this for my house. That goes more to the local government. So you'll find varieties of this throughout the country, but keep in mind, anything the government provides has to be paid for. And where we'll leave you today, we're going to do a shorter lesson today, is the Federal Reserve. And this is probably the most important aspect of the government that people just don't know about. So what is the Federal Reserve? The Federal Reserve is, in effect, the national bank. So the United States does, in effect, have a bank, and that's known as the Federal Reserve System. And it's a variety of banks from throughout the country. And it's an independent agency, but it really almost acts as its own branch of government. It's technically a government corporation, It exists independent. It was created by Congress. The leaders are appointed by the president and confirmed by Congress. But then once they're on there, they're kind of independent. In terms of what they do, you're going to have an assignment about this, so I won't do the whole thing. But big picture, what it does is it controls the monetary policy of the country. So that is just in effect, and you've probably gotten this a little bit from your economics and personal finance class, but just making sure that the monetary system or the money system is healthy in the country. So they don't deal with the taxes we pay or how high our taxes are. That is called fiscal policy. What they do is just maintaining the value of our currency. So trying to avoid inflation. They have a number of tools that they use to do that. They also regulate the banks and serve as a bank for the banks. So they will lend money to the banks. They will supervise the banks to make sure that everything is happening as it should. So I will leave you there today because that will be covered more in depth in your assignment. Again, I hope you guys are well and staying safe, and I will see you guys later.